Hello and welcome to another video, and again I've got to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed, hit the like button, and that's just dust floating around. Is that a dust or a gnat? I don't know, it's a bit of dust. Not an orb, dust, just dust. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's subscribed to my channel, everyone who's hit like, and all your comments. They're brilliant and they've been quite funny actually, the last lot of comments. And also for those that have done buy me a coffee, thank you so much. And for those that have joined my membership as well, which is just brilliant. More stuff coming up for the members soon. But on this video, I need to explain a little bit before we start. So in all purpose, this is a haunted camping video about some people that go camping and have sort of a bad experience. On top of that, there are a lot more things that go on that we need to cover. First of all, we're going to cover some weird stuff in this video, mainly at the beginning, and then we'll get on to the camping one after that. But we're looking at hobgoblins, boggarts and fairies. Please don't turn off. Look, it gets more interesting, okay? But what I want to get over is that today we live in a world where we've got information at our fingertips. We've got people that will correct misinformation. Unfortunately, we also live in a world today where there's a lot of incorrect information being put out there via the likes of TikTok and social media. But back in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, if somebody told you something, you either believed it or not. And when a large number of people would tell you something, you tended to believe it as the truth. So when a large group of people tell you that up on a hill somewhere, there's a cave, and if you put items outside it that are broken, the hobgoblin or boggart will fix it. People started to believe that, and that is the truth. You know, that was just the way life was back then. Same things for werewolves, vampires, and even witches. So, you know, we've covered that recently. So this one is about a place called Beeley. Now, Beeley is in the Peak District, and it's not far from Chatsworth House. And near Buxton, there is a cave where in the 1700s and the 1800s, people believed that it was inhabited by a goblin or a boggart. And they would take up broken items that need to be repaired, leave it outside that cave, and come back a few days later, and those items had been repaired by the goblin, boggart or hobgoblin. Now, or in some believed it was just the fairies. If those items were not fixed, it was said that your family was cursed and that bad fortunes would come across you and your family. Now, people strongly believed this. Just up on Beeley Moor, we have the Hurst house. Now, this is a Bronze Age burial site, and people believe that had a hobgoblin around that area, and that hobgoblin would sometimes be friendly, sometimes just want to be left alone, and sometimes would be malicious. And please don't turn off. Right? But this is what we live in, a country and a world where things like this over the years were believed by nearly everyone. Actually, they were believed by everyone. So that is what people believed. So much so, as I say, we have the Matthew Hopkins one we done last video. They believed in witches, okay? We have ones where whole villages used to believe in vampires, and they went around breaking up graves and sticking stakes through them and putting nails through their knees so they didn't escape again. This is the time before modern technology and all that sort of stuff. Even in my lifetime, I mean, I'm 53 now. Thank you for my birthday messages. That's really nice of you. But even in my lifetime, we've gone through a time without computers to now using AI, chat and all this sort of stuff. And it's incredible. We've seen things, and information is at our fingertips all the time. Back then, they didn't have none of that. The old pub stories and sitting around campfires was the way they passed information. Now, although I'm not going to cover much about Beeley itself, the incidents we're going to be talking about don't happen in that village. It's important to know what sort of area we're going to be looking into. Beeley was a very, very small village in the grounds of Chatsworth Estate. So, Chatsworth Estate is just up the road, and this sat in their grounds. And still does today have strong connections with Chatsworth House. The Beeley Inn started in 1746, and it was mainly there to look after travellers coming through that area. The village itself was mainly employed by Chatsworth Estate. So, and even today, there's people that work in Chatsworth House on the Chatsworth Estate that all live in Beeley Village. So I don't upset Beeley Village because it looks really lovely and I'd like to go there one day. So I may even pop in there over the next few days anyway. Don't really know where I'm going, but yeah, we're going, we're heading like Bath, Bristol, then heading up Wales and then coming across. And literally we're only going for a few days, so it's going to be a lot of travelling. But yeah, it's going to give me an opportunity to film some locations I want to do and get some more stories out to you. But this one is about camping, and someone just said to me that they were listening to my video whilst they were about to camp, and I was like, don't listen to the next one, please don't. And on that note, not many of you got cheese and wine, did you? So well done to those who did get cheese and wine. So again, watch the end of the videos. Watch the end of the videos, not just listen, watch the end of the videos. So we're going to get into this story now, but keep in mind the boggarts and the hobgoblins and all that sort of weird history around this area. I say Beeley Village is where a lot of these reports were told, where travellers used to come down and feed this information into Beeley Village. And being the Beeley Inn was the easy route for travellers to go into, and it was the most well-known traveller inn in that area, it's where those stories sort of like manifested. And when the burial sites up on the Hurst house was found, and all these Bronze Age items were being found out of it, when they broke up the burial site, there seemed to be a burnt ashes there. It was actually a cremation site, and then it was all covered up and they put all the stones on it, but items were found in that area to date back to the Bronze Age. So we're looking at a very, very historically important area of land. Puts into question some of the things these people did that I'm about to tell you about. So we start off with two brothers, James and Rupert Daniels. Now this is 1979, and the two brothers don't live far from the Peak District, and they've done this before. They go up to Beeley, and from Beeley they will hike out and just see how far they can go, and sometimes they'd camp over. Now this is an important fact you need to know. Technically, and it is only technically and only technically, you're not allowed to camp in the Peak District because most of the land up there is privately owned and you need the landowner's permission to camp. A lot of people don't, and if you get caught, it's trespass and it's a civil matter. Back then, you're more likely to have shotguns brought out at you, but that can still be the case today. It is private land and you should always get the landowner's permission. The other thing I should say is that James and Rupert Daniels, their name sounds very, very familiar to me. So when I was reading the poll, I was going through trying to find other stories that I may have covered or that I've read in other books to see if they come up again, or I've already put a report in. Now I couldn't find anything. I don't know if I've missed something. If any of you out there have heard these names, let me know, because I'm not saying I'm suspicious, but James and Rupert Daniels, I'm sure as I'm saying it, I've said those names before. And as I say, my memory isn't always that good. I can tell you loads of history, but I have to be reminded of the names of people. But anyway, back to this story. James and Rupert Daniels have arrived at Beeley and they've mapped out their route. So their route is leaving Beeley Inn, they're heading up onto Beeley Moor and up to Hurst house, and then finishing at Wigley. And it's only sort of like maybe a 10-mile hike, maybe a bit longer, maybe a bit shorter, but they are going to do this over 2 days. So they're going to be hiking up to Hurst house and then camp somewhere along the perimeter. Now there is a woods that run down there, and then the next day they're going to hike over to Wigley. Wigley, what a name. I did have to check that, make sure it's right. Wigley. You also got is it the Fox and Goose Inn in Wigley and the Royal Oak, but they're going to the Royal Oak. What I should have said at the beginning is James is 25 and his brother's 28, so we're not talking about young people. So this was mid-October. It gets dark around about 4 o'clock-ish there. The clocks haven't gone back yet. So they wanted to leave around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Plenty of time to go up to Hurst house and then come back down the side and make camp by the woods. It was a lovely, pleasant day. It was actually very mild. But as I was heading across Beeley Moor, James and Rupert started getting a bit of a weird feeling. A feeling as if they wasn't on their own. Now, it wouldn't be unusual for other hikers to be up there or they'd come across them. But as far as they could see, they were the only ones on that moor that day. But this feeling of not being alone, they couldn't shake it. They kept looking over their shoulder all the time, and they're chatting to each other saying, I really do believe that someone is either spying on us or someone is tracking us up the hill. But they couldn't. They did stop for about 15 minutes to make sure nobody was coming up behind them and there's no one around. And they carried on heading up to the Hob. And I'm going to call it from the Hob now. I keep saying the whole thing. It is getting really confusing. I keep pausing because I keep mucking it up. That said, it is called Hurst house after Hobgoblins. So Hobgoblins actually lent its name to that house. So that's how much it was in their culture up that area that they believed in Hobgoblins. Which James and Rupert joked that maybe it was a Hobgoblin that was following them. Now, Rupert didn't... He was a little bit more sceptical than James. And he did joke around about it. But both of them sort of like know the folklore of that area and some sort of foundation of belief in that sort of folklore that, there's no smoke without fire sort of thing, that, they were on tenterhooks. So felt as if somebody was following them. They were coming up with all these silly little excuses and bizarre tales that tend between each other. So their senses were getting heightened, not only by this strange feeling, but by the stories they're telling each other. After a while, they made it to the Hob. As I say, this wasn't a very long or stressful walk. They sat down, had some food, then got up, had a little walk around the Hob, and then the plan was to walk down the side of the moor to the tree line to set up camp. Now, the reason I was doing this is that, again, as I said about the permission, and if they could hide in the tree line, there's less likely to be spotted and get moaned at. Now, looking into it, it's a little bit difficult because I've seen a lot of wild camping in this area on the videos on YouTube. So I'm guessing either it's very blasé that people don't really stick to that. No one really mentions that they're going and getting permission. So I know in the Lake District you can basically camp anywhere in the Lake District, up on the fells. I'm not too sure about the Peak District. I say most of it is privately owned around now. And correct me if I'm wrong. So around about 4 o'clock, they decide they're going to start heading down to the woodline. Just as they're about to do that, James bent down to pick up his rucksack and stood up. And what he claimed to see and what he described was a dancing figure round about 100 yards in front of him. And the way he describes it was like a dancing figure, but it was very, very bright. It had a glow about it. He shouts out to Rupert, and Rupert looks up. Rupert also sees this figure dancing around about 100 yards away from them, and then quickly just disappearing, just vanished. They're looking at each other going, what was that? They're like, maybe it's a hobgoblin. They start giggling. At the same time, they both see something that they can't explain. And it gave them the term I've been using lately is the heebie-jeebies. I get that. When something like that may have happened, it spooked them. They're heading back down to the tree line. They can't shake this thing that they've seen. All the time while they're setting up camp down at the tree line, they keep going back to it, going, what do you think it was? And keep questioning each other, saying, well, did it have any features? No, I didn't see any features on it. They're setting up there. By the time they've set up their camp, it is very dark. They're looking back up to the moor where they've come. And again, they see this bright figure glowing in the darkness seems to be dancing about. Now, this really scares them, and they're there all night, and they're regretting their decision already. I can actually explain that bright thing, and I will do, but we'll get to the end of that and I'll give you an explanation of what I believe this was. And it goes a little bit back to my childhood as well, which is quite funny, and probably your childhood. Now, when I said they set up camp, literally all they done, get some tarpaulin, tie it between some trees, and basically put a mat down and their sleeping bags, and that's how they're going to sleep. They brought some food with them that I was going to have for dinner. And I this bit here makes me cringe because it reminds me of a bad memory. James opens up a tin of Spam. Now, if you remember, and I think you probably still do, we ain't said Spam for years, the old key on the Spam. He was using the key on the Spam and it broke, and he pulled it with his fingers trying to open up the can. He really badly cut his hand. This is something my mum done when I was really little, and it's traumatised me for years. It was a really bad cut, and they didn't really know how to deal with it. It would not stop bleeding. They're wrapping his hand up, and they're thinking, it's a bit late to go back now because it is dark, but it's not far for them to walk if they really want to do it. But James is saying he's going to be completely fine. And he's laying there and his hand is throbbing, absolutely throbbing. Now, this is where the stretch of imagination for me gets a little bit too much. They start falling asleep. James is laying there with his throbbing hand. He drifts off. And in his mind, he feels somebody lifts his hand up and starts doing something to it that makes it go really, really hot. James wakes up, and when he looks at his hand, the cut on his hand has healed. There's a line there where the cut was, but it hadn't been bleeding, and the gaping wound in his hand had actually sealed. James believed that something had come down and fixed his hand. As I say, this is stretching my limits of imagination. This is folklore, but this is 1979, so we're not, but I'm telling you the stories, yeah? So remember, I'm telling you these stories. Rupert is completely freaked out by this. And it's around about 1 o'clock in the morning at this point. And they're definitely not going to be going back. James is like, maybe a fairy come and fixed it, referring to their conversation they'd been having before about hobgoblins and boggarts and all this. Right at that time, they started hearing giggling in the woods behind them. This made them feel very uneasy. James is saying maybe it's their imagination and things are just getting a little bit too much. Rupert is going, I can hear giggling children in the woods. They turn around, and up on the moor, they see 3 or 4 of these glowing figures dancing around on the moor. They're like, this is the creepiest thing they've ever seen in their life. They're watching these dancing figures for a few minutes, and then one by one they disappear. Feeling very uneasy, they're contemplating, do they go back? Do they just pack up their stuff and head back? They know the route. It's a footpath out of there, and they could stick to it. They're like, no, we'll tough it out. Which, is understandable. They're laying there, and minds are playing tricks on them. And then Rupert says that he can hear footsteps coming through the woods. At the same time, James says, no, they're not coming from the woods. They're coming from the moor. They're walking down the moor path. The moon is out, and there's a little bit of moonlight. What they describe is looking up at the moor and seeing a large figure with what seemed to be a very large jacket made of fur over his shoulders, walking down the side of the moor, right towards where they were at the woods. They're like taken back by this, thinking, now, we didn't see nobody up there at that time. Is this the person that was stalking us? But they can't really describe his features. As he gets closer, they describe him with plaited hair and a really big beard. But as they're looking at him and staring at him, James calls out. He calls out hello. The gentleman just goes on walking towards them. Now he gets to about 50 foot from them and then disappears. Now first of all, they think they've lost him behind a tree, but he never reappears to the other side of that tree. So they didn't see him vanish. He just passed behind a tree and never come back out. After a few minutes, both of them get up and walk round and check behind that tree to see if he was there, and there's nobody there. As they look back round to where their camp was, they see this figure standing by their camp, not right by where they put the tarpaulin up, but the back of him by their camp, walking into the woods. This completely throws them and really terrifies them again. They're not having a good evening. They're not having a good time. Just as this figure disappears into the woods, they turn back and look up at the moor because they can hear more footsteps. What they describe is basically an army of maybe Bronze Age people. Now we're running a guess here, it's a Bronze Age site, and there's a burial site up there, walking down the side of that hill. Both of them describe them exactly the same, and that is that their clothing is something you've seen in old films that depict olden eras. So it was the furry jackets, animal skin jackets, animal skin clothing, and animal skin boots, right in that Bronze Age period dress. So we are looking potentially at the ghosts of these people that done the burial. Maybe this large gentleman was the ghost of the person that had been cremated up there at the burial site at Hurst's house. James and Rupert were completely petrified. Now, they've not seen anything like this in their life. They've been joking about hobgoblins and boggarts and all this, and they've been hearing these voices, laughing children. They've seen these lights up on the moor. Now they're seeing these ghostly figures walking down of maybe a Bronze Age army. They're getting the whole shebang going on here. And I say this is where things have stretched when I'm reading the report, I'm like, there's a lot to take in here. And you start asking questions. When you're reading this, you're asking yourself questions that, are they putting a fast one? But by the end of it, I truly believe that this is what they think they saw. And there are some explanations that we can come up with. They sit around their campsite for a few more hours, waiting to see if anything else happens, and they decide they're going to start heading off to Wiggly. Now it's still dark, we're getting around about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, so it's not long before the sun's going to start coming up, and the sky is getting lighter and lighter as they're doing this. They have to pass Hurst's house again. Again, as they get up to the Hob house, they see a bright light further down in the moor. Again, this brings them back to what they've seen the day before, but that light doesn't last long and just disappears. They start heading down and into more like the farmer's land, and then crossing over and into Wiggly. But because they got there so early, the Royal Oak wasn't open. As I said, this is a short walk and you can do it rather quickly. But when they got to Wiggly, and this is just outside Wiggly where the Royal Oak is, they come across the farmer. After hesitating, they decided to have a conversation with the farmer. The farmer sort of backs up something that we're going to talk about in a minute. He turned around and said that he's seen these lights on the moors so often, and he's not too sure what they are, but he thinks they're natural. They turn around and say about this weird thing with the hand, and the farmer jokes that a hobgoblin had fixed it, that this was hobgoblin. They say about the children laughing. He turns around and said that he believes those children are ghosts from Chatsworth House that lost their life through illnesses over 100 years ago, and they haunt the woods. They mention about the figures they see walking down the moor, and he tells them that other people have reported seeing those figures walking across the moor, not exactly where they were, but people have reported seeing these figures walking across the moor many times, and they probably have just seen this vision. Could this vision be what we call a time slip or a stone tape theory, where this is like the Roman soldiers, where that image gets replayed again and again? After talking to the farmer, they chill out for a little bit, the bus comes along, and they get the bus back to Beeley, where their car is. Nothing's really more spoken about it. A few years later, Rupert goes on a little hike over the same route. This time, he's taking his 10-year-old son with him, and he's telling his 10-year-old son these stories about what him and his brother see a few years before. His son starts pointing out these little figures that he can see down by the woods. Rupert's just joking and saying, yeah, they're probably going to the children. The son describes what you'd now say was your hobgoblin, your boggart, the gross things that you buy in the shop that look all deformed, the goblin things. He describes one of those. I mean, he says only about 3 foot tall. This rocks Rupert, because there's nothing his son's ever really seen before that will make him describe something like that. And he takes it seriously. And he sits down with his son by the side of the woods, and they're looking to see if they can see anything else. Rupert then says that, again, he hears these children laughing in the forest. Is it a case that if you believe in this folklore stuff, that hobgoblins and all this sort of stuff, were they real? Now, when you look at the folklore stuff and all that, and where the foundation of it comes, something has got to trigger it. The hobgoblin thing with the caves is very, very weird. Now, the caves is not far from where they are, yet you had a whole village at one point going up there, putting items outside this cave, and they were getting fixed. Somebody in that cave was coming out fixing stuff. Was this a small community of maybe disfigured humans, or just something like that? Something must be interacting with those people. There must be an element that triggered all these little myths and legends and, all this sort of stuff. Fairies, what were fairies? Where did the tale of fairies come from? Something has triggered that. Now we're going to look at some explanations of what might have gone on. Okay, so sort of going to total debunking mode. The little dancing figures, we can actually explain them naturally. These are something they call Will-o'-the-Wisp. Now, if you ever see the cartoon Will-o'-the-Wisp, it is exactly what it looks like in the cartoon. It is this glowing, flamey type figure that can pop up across anywhere where there are minerals in the ground, something decomposing in the ground, across moorlands, across any sort of land like that. And this is natural gas venting off into the atmosphere, and it can illuminate. And that dancing thing is just that gas moving about in natural air. It's not a very common sighting, but it has been reported over the Peak District, Yorkshire Moors, over Dartmoor, over Saddleworth Moor. These things do happen, and especially over places like peat bogs as well. So these are will-o'-the-wisps. Some people see them in woods where you've got a lot of decomposing material from leaves and mulch and all that, and natural gases leak up and these light effects happen. So we can explain that to a certain extent, and it would explain why the farmer said he's seen them before, and he probably knew what they were but didn't want to disappoint these people that just think they've had a paranormal experience. Now look at the children's voices that reported as well. It's a confusing one, and I'm cut between it. Okay, so the paranormal explanation is that Chatsworth House was built in around about 1549, and it was for the Duke of Devonshire, and it's been in the hands of the Cavendish family. Now, when you dig in through the history of all that, there was a lot of child deaths in that period of time. And the servants that used to come up there, as I say, they were served by Beeley, and unfortunately their children also passed away during that time. So yes, we could say that these are the ghosts of the children that haunt the woods. So I just choked. Okay, saved by Pepsi Max. But as the paranormal explanation, what could they have heard themselves if it wasn't the ghosts of the children? Chatsworth House hosts a lot of events throughout the years. These events go on to the early hours of the morning. Laughter, when carried across open spaces, and yes, there was woods in between them and the Chatsworth House. Going back to 1979, it was a lot quieter then. There's a lot less planes and all that sort of stuff, and the road motorway noises wasn't as bad what we get now. If people were laughing and joking over at Chatsworth House, that sound could quite easily travel across the moors and into those woods, and makes it sound and echoing around those woods. So that is the non-paranormal explanation. What about the figures walking down the banks of the moor? In all the times I've been doing paranormal investigations and research and meeting people from that environment that go to all those places all over the world, there's one thing that we all sort of agree on, and that is sometimes you can pick up on an atmosphere, and something must be causing that atmosphere. If you can go to an open field and something will make you feel creepy, and you don't know what, you can't put your finger on it, but you get a sense of something. And then later on you'll find out that maybe a lot of people lost their life there, or a tragic event happened there. So for me, this is like the stone tape theory. And the most compelling evidence for that is the Roman army that is seen walking through a cellar. Now, because that's been seen by credible people, I would like to see it myself before I believe it, but that is what I am like. If James and Rupert stick to their story, and they've stuck to their story for, decades, they've stuck to their story for decades, and they really believe that they see this figure walking down the hill. Apparently they've accepted the will-o'-the-wisp explanation. That was put to them eventually. And they agree that the sound from children and people out of Chatsworth House could have come through. They're still convinced that they were ghost children in the woods, so they still believe that. Is it highly likely that this is a stone tape theory or a replay of an event of these soldiers coming down the moor? If you believe in paranormal, probably. Yeah, why not? If you believe in ghosts and all that, then that falls right into that category. For me, was it mass hysteria? Had they spooked themselves? They felt uneasy walking up there already. Yeah, things were playing on their mind. Now, I don't know what they were like back then, as in their 20s. Were they doing anything? Like 1979. You can't rule it out. You can't rule it out. But it does leave one answer to the question, and that is the hand injury. Well, it's got to be a hobgoblin, isn't it? The hobgoblin's got to have fixed it. There's no other explanation for it. Yeah, this video isn't really what I planned. I was going to try and do it all seriously and make it creepy and spooky. But more I deep dived into the information. And this is from some really old books and magazines and all this sort of stuff. And I think I first heard it on Radio 5 Live. Must have been... They weren't in Radio 5 Live. Must have been like Radio 1 back in 2000, something like that. No, it would have been 5 Live. Yeah, so it must have been 5 Live in about 2000. And it stuck with me. And I made a note of it. I had some old bits of stuff put down and wrote the story out. And I think originally I was going to put it on my website when I used to have a website. And so I still had a lot of the information there. But it still puzzled me. And I do hope that James or Rupert see this. They may comment on it. As I said to you at the beginning, their names ring a bell. I think you've got, for me, after doing so many stories of paranormal stuff, because that name rings a bell, it makes me a little bit suspicious. Either that they've used this on a few stories that they may have sold as the truth, or I'm completely wrong. You know, it is just something about it, not say pulling your leg a little bit, but these are one of those stories that it has gone down into folklore of the area now, and some travellers that go into the Royal Oak and the Beeley Inn have heard of this. It was recently brought up on some of these podcasts, so I know this story is out there and other people are aware of it. Because I had this previous information on it, I just thought I'd do this video and say I'm meant to be going away, so I'm trying to record some videos up front, and I just thought it was a nice little story. It's modernish, 1979, not too far in the past, based on old historic sites, which is always good because we can't dispute the fact that all this is happening around an ancient burial site, and where a cave down the road in Buxton where hobgoblins and all boggarts are meant to do weird things, and there's plenty of videos on them and fairies and all this sort of stuff. But again, it's that thing that at one time people believed that hobgoblins and all that were true. So why can't they fix a hand? Oh dear, right, I think I'm going to call it a night. It's getting too much. So again, thank you for your support. If you've made it this far to the video, well done. I only gave up halfway through. But no, it's a good one. I like it. It's a bit different, not creepy. It's just a little bit, no. It's about keeping those myths and legends alive, isn't it? So if you made it this far, comment hobgoblin at the beginning of your comment, okay, on YouTube. So yeah, no, not cheese and wine, not stormtrooper, but just start off with hobgoblin. Oh, it is only Pepsi, honest. I think maybe more. Well, maybe I need something now. Anyway, have a good week, and you'll see this one on Tuesday, and then there'll be another one on Friday. I hope there'll be another one on Friday. I'm away, so it will be one that I film between that and whatever. I'm waffling now. I've really got to go. Right, I'll see you later. Bye.